That wealthy and influential black businesswoman decides to test the true nature of her staff by disguising herself as a homeless woman and visiting one of her own high-end restaurants. Expecting to see kindness and professionalism, she instead faces humiliation and cruelty from those she trusted to uphold her values, but they have no idea who they are mistreating until she reveals her true identity. What happens next leaves everyone speechless and proves that power is best wielded by those who truly understand respect. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. The Unseen Test. The evening air was crisp as soft jazz played in the background, blending seamlessly with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of elegant conversation. Le Chateau Noir, one of the city's most exclusive fine dining establishments, exuded opulence from every detail: the grand chandeliers, the imported marble floors, the impeccably dressed patrons sipping aged wine without a care in the world. Behind the success of this establishment stood Monica Sinclair, a self-made black millionaire whose empire stretched across multiple high-end restaurants, boutique hotels, and philanthropic ventures. Every brick of her business was built with resilience, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in dignity. Yet lately, she had sensed something unsettling: whispers from trusted sources, murmurs of discrimination and poor treatment towards those deemed unworthy of the space she had worked so hard to create. She had heard stories of customers turned away based on their appearance, of staff sneering at those who did not fit the mold of the typical elite clientele. And while Monica prided herself on running an establishment where respect and professionalism reigned, doubt gnawed at her. Were the values she instilled truly being upheld in her absence? There was only one way to find out. The transformation. A few hours before the peak dinner service, Monica stood before her mirror, dressed in designer loungewear, her sleek bob styled to perfection. But that was not the woman who would walk through the restaurant doors tonight. She removed her jewelry, letting her diamond earrings clink softly against the dresser. Her silk blouse was replaced with a faded, oversized sweatshirt, her tailored pants swapped for tattered jeans that barely clung together. She smeared subtle dirt onto her face and beneath her nails, giving herself the appearance of someone who had seen the roughest edges of society. The transformation was complete. She took a deep breath as she examined herself. The world was about to see Monica Sinclair not as a woman of influence, but as someone invisible, someone who, in the eyes of many, held no value. With one last look, she grabbed a worn-out bag and stepped into the night. An entrance met with disdain. The moment she approached Le Chateau Noir, the reactions were immediate. The valet, who usually greeted guests with a warm smile and a respectful nod, barely glanced at her. His eyes flickered with hesitation before settling into a hard, indifferent expression. He subtly stepped in front of the door, a silent barrier between her and the restaurant's gilded interior. "Ma'am, this isn't a place where you can linger," he said, his tone polished but sharp. Monica, fully committed to her role, clutched her bag and spoke softly. I just wanted to see if I could get something to eat. I can pay." A hostess near the entrance, a tall blonde woman named Rachel, wrinkled her nose as she overheard. She turned toward the valet, exchanging a knowing glance before stepping forward. "This isn't that kind of place," Rachel said, her voice dripping with condescension. "There's a shelter a few blocks down that might be more accommodating." Monica tilted her head. "I have money." Rachel let out a short, dismissive laugh. "I'm sure you do." Other guests waiting nearby began to notice the commotion. Some cast curious glances, others looked away uncomfortably. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit leaned toward his wife and muttered something, shaking his head. Monica caught snippets of whispers. "What is she doing here?" "Probably looking for handouts." "Security should handle this." The weight of their judgment was crushing, but Monica remained composed. She was here to witness the truth, no matter how much it stung. Rachel exhaled impatiently, flipping through the reservation book. "We're fully booked for the evening," she lied smoothly. Monica remained unmoved. "I'll wait." Rachel's smile thinned. "That won't be necessary." The final insult. A few moments later, the restaurant manager, Daniel Foster, appeared. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 40s, with an air of superiority that he wore like a tailored suit. Rachel turned to him immediately. "This woman is causing a disruption." Daniel's gaze swept over Monica, and it was clear he had already made up his mind. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We reserve the right to deny service." Monica met his eyes. "On what grounds?" Daniel's lips curled into a smirk, as if the answer was obvious. "Dress code. This is a fine dining establishment and we have standards to uphold." Monica let the silence stretch between them, watching as Daniel grew more confident in his position. Rachel folded her arms. "If you don't leave now, we'll have to call security." At that moment, a waiter carrying an expensive bottle of wine stepped too quickly and tripped, sending the deep red liquid splashing across Monica's sweatshirt. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The waiter stumbled backward, eyes wide with horror, but before he could apologize, Rachel clicked her tongue in disgust. "Oh, great," she scoffed. "Now she's making a mess." Daniel turned to the waiter. "Get someone to clean this up." "And you," he said, turning back to Monica, "get out before I call the authorities." Monica slowly looked down at her ruined sweatshirt, then back up at the people staring at her as if she were a stain on their perfect world. It was time. She reached into her bag, pulled out a pristine black envelope, and placed it gently on the podium in front of Rachel. The hostess frowned, but picked it up hesitantly, her eyes scanning the elegant gold lettering inside. Then her face went ghostly white. Rachel's throat bobbed as she whispered, "Ms. Sinclair?" Daniel snatched the envelope from her hands, reading the letter inside, his expression twisted in horror. Monica met their gazes, her voice now clear and commanding. "That's right. And I believe you were about to have me removed from my own restaurant." Rachel took a shaky step back. The guests who had whispered about her just moments ago now sat in stunned silence. Monica tilted her head, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Care to explain?" The reckoning had begun. Chapter 2. The Weight of Truth. A thick silence settled over the restaurant. The once confident staff, the murmuring patrons, the ever-smug Daniel Foster, all of them now frozen in place, their expressions shifting from superiority to sheer panic. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension as Monica Sinclair, no longer the dismissed beggar, took control of the room. Rachel's fingers trembled as she clutched the black envelope, her face drained of all color. The name on the letterhead was undeniable. The woman they had just humiliated, mocked, and attempted to remove was not just some random intruder. She was the owner. Monica let the weight of that revelation settle before speaking. "Well?" she asked, her voice cool but edged with something deeper. "I believe I was about to be thrown out." Rachel's lips parted, but no words came out. Daniel, however, was faster to recover. He straightened his posture and cleared his throat. "Ms. Sinclair, Monica held up a hand, and the entire room obeyed the unspoken command to shut up. "No excuses," she said, her tone sharp. "No justifications. I don't want to hear any rehearsed lines about misunderstandings or policy. I want the truth." Rachel opened her mouth again, but Monica wasn't done. She turned her gaze toward Daniel. "Tell me, Mr. Foster, how long have you been treating customers this way?" Daniel hesitated, flicking a nervous glance toward the well-dressed patrons, still watching the unfolding spectacle. "Miss Sinclair, I assure you, You what?" Monica cut in. "You don't serve people who don't fit a certain appearance. You decide who is worthy of eating at my establishment." Daniel swallowed hard. "That's not what I meant." "Oh?" Monica arched an eyebrow. "Because that's exactly what you did. And judging by how quick you all were to dismiss me, I'd wager it wasn't the first time." Rachel's eyes darted between Monica and Daniel, as if calculating whether she could still talk her way out of this mess. "We were just following policy," she tried weakly. Monica exhaled a slow, measured breath. She had expected some level of mistreatment tonight. But this was worse than she imagined. She turned to the guests, many of whom were still staring, their expressions ranging from horrified realization to quiet guilt. "I wonder," she said, her voice carrying through the restaurant, If I had walked in here looking the way I usually do, wearing my tailored suits and diamond earrings, would anyone have dared to treat me this way? The silence was her answer. The slow collapse of Daniel Foster. Daniel had run out of ways to talk himself out of this. His face glistened under the warm restaurant lighting, his forehead damp with nervous sweat. His career, his reputation, his entire future, all of it now rested in the hands of the woman he had so carelessly dismissed just moments ago. "Mrs. Sinclair, please," he tried, his voice bordering on desperate now. "It was a mistake." Monica tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Oh, it was a mistake," she echoed, her voice deceptively soft. "Tell me, Mr. Foster, did you suddenly develop these policies just tonight, or have you been running my business under your own set of rules for a while now?" Daniel struggled for an answer. "Because," Monica continued, stepping forward, "I've spent my entire life building businesses that welcome everyone. I built this restaurant with the belief that fine dining is an experience, not an exclusive club for the privileged few. And yet tonight, you made it very clear that under your management, this place has become a sanctuary for elitism, arrogance, and cruelty." Her words were met with a quiet, uneasy shift in the room. Some guests lowered their heads, as if realizing they had played a part in this toxic environment. Others remained silent, knowing they had nodded along just moments ago when Monica was treated as an outcast. Daniel opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. The cracks spread. A figure at the edge of the restaurant suddenly moved, Lana, one of the junior servers, who had been standing frozen near the bar. She hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Ms. Sinclair," she said hesitantly. "It's true. This isn't the first time." Rachel spun toward her. "Lana, shut up." But Lana didn't shut up. She glanced at Monica, then at the silent guests, then back at her boss. "I've seen it before. People getting turned away because they didn't look rich enough. I've heard Rachel and Daniel laugh about it. They tell us to vet the customers before seating them." Rachel's face twisted with rage. "You little—" "Enough," Monica snapped, shutting down whatever venom Rachel was about to spew. She turned back to Lana, her gaze softer now. "Thank you for speaking up." Lana nodded quickly, her hands still shaking. Monica turned her attention back to Daniel, who looked as if his entire world had just crumbled beneath him, because it had. "I'll deal with you later," Monica told him. Then she turned back to Rachel. "And you." Rachel took an instinctive step back. "Miss Sinclair, I was just doing what I thought was best for the restaurant." "Oh? You thought humiliating paying customers was what was best?" Monica's voice remained even, but her eyes burned with authority. Rachel swallowed hard. I didn't mean—" Monica raised a single finger. "Not another word. You and I are done here." Rachel blinked. "Wait, what?" "You're fired." It took a second for the words to register. Rachel's lips parted in disbelief. "You can't—" "I can," Monica said coldly. "And I am. Pack your things and get out." Rachel looked at Daniel as if hoping he would intervene, but Daniel was too busy grappling with his own impending downfall to help her. One of the other servers, a young man named Jared, smirked slightly and muttered, "Calm as fast today." Monica turned to him. "And you?" she asked, her gaze searching. "Have you participated in this?" Jared quickly straightened. "No, ma'am," he said. "I hated it, but I was scared to speak up." Monica nodded, understanding. Fear had a way of silencing even good people. "Then consider this your chance to do better," she said. Jared exhaled, relief washing over his face. Rachel, meanwhile, was still standing in stunned disbelief. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You need people like me to keep this place exclusive." Monica gave her a long, unreadable look before delivering the final blow. "No, I need people who understand what this restaurant was meant to be." Rachel's face twisted in fury, but there was nothing left to say. Security, who had been prepared to throw Monica out just moments ago, was now escorting Rachel to the exit. The reckoning is just beginning. As the restaurant slowly settled, Monica turned back to the waiting guests. Some were still stunned, others deeply embarrassed, and a few looked as if they had just witnessed the greatest performance of their lives. She let out a slow breath. "For those of you who stood by and watched, let this be your lesson," she said. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Monica turned to Lana. "Tell the kitchen to prepare me a table," and with that, she walked into her restaurant, not as an outcast but as the rightful owner. Chapter 3. Reclaiming the Throne. Monica Sinclair walked through the restaurant with a calm, deliberate stride, every step a declaration of her authority. The same people who had looked down on her just moments ago now watched in stunned silence as she reclaimed her rightful place. A hushed energy lingered in the air as staff and guests alike absorbed the weight of what had just happened. Le Chateau Noir had never felt more tense, nor had it ever been clearer who truly owned the space. Monica reached the center of the restaurant, where a prime table sat unoccupied. With a slow, purposeful movement, she pulled out the chair and took her seat. The remaining staff hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should they serve her? Should they pretend nothing had happened? From across the room, Lana, the only one with the courage to speak up earlier, caught Monica's eye. The young server gave a hesitant nod before rushing toward the kitchen. Moments later, she emerged with a menu standing nervously beside Monica's table. "Would you like to see the menu, ma'am?" Lana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Monica glanced at the finely printed menu, then back at Lana. "No," she said. "I already know what I want." Lana straightened. "What would you like?" Monica leaned back slightly, her sharp gaze flickering over the entire restaurant before settling back on Lana. "I want to know how deep this rot goes." Lana hesitated, her fingers tightening around her notepad. Monica folded her hands in front of her. "Tell me the truth, Lana. How long has this been happening?" Lana glanced nervously toward the kitchen doors, as if expecting someone to storm out and silence her. "A while," she admitted. "Since before I started working here. Rachel and Mr. Foster made sure to keep everything polished on the surface, but they had their own rules." Monica's jaw tightened. "And no one ever questioned them?" Lana hesitated. "Some did," she said carefully, "but they didn't last long." A few of the other servers exchanged glances. They knew what Lana was referring to. Staff who had objected to the unspoken exclusivity rules had either quit out of frustration or had been quietly pushed out by Daniel and Rachel. Monica exhaled slowly, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She had spent years building this business, ensuring that every one of her establishments was a reflection of her values. Yet, under Daniel's leadership, her own restaurant had turned into a breeding ground for elitism and discrimination, and she wouldn't stand for it. The kitchen's complicity. From the back of the restaurant, a chef stepped out of the kitchen. His name tag read Marco, and his face was unreadable as he approached Monica's table. "Ms. Sinclair," he greeted, his tone neutral. "I heard about what happened. I just wanted to say I had no idea." Monica's gaze pinned him to the spot. "Didn't you?" Marco's composure faltered. I never saw anything personally," he stammered. "I'm just in the kitchen most of the time." Monica tilted her head. "So you're saying that in all the time you worked here, you never once noticed how certain guests were treated? Never heard any complaints? Never overheard the way Rachel and Daniel spoke about customers they didn't want here?" Marco shifted uncomfortably. He couldn't outright lie. Not now. I guess I heard things," he admitted, "but it wasn't my place to interfere." Monica's voice dropped into something softer, something more dangerous. "And you were fine with that?" Marco swallowed hard. I needed this job. So did the people who spoke out and were fired," Monica countered. "The ones who weren't afraid to stand against it." The tension thickened. Monica could see the fear in his eyes, the guilt simmering just beneath the surface. She wasn't trying to humiliate him, but she needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal ran. Before Marco could respond, another voice cut through the room. "This is ridiculous." "Daniel." Monica turned her gaze toward the disgraced manager, who still stood near the entrance, unwilling to go quietly. "This is a restaurant, not a courtroom," Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. "You came in here looking for trouble. You set us up." Monica raised an eyebrow. Set you up? Daniel scoffed. Yes. You deliberately dressed like that to provoke a reaction. You wanted this to happen. Monica studied him for a long moment. Then she let out a soft chuckle, though there was no humor in it. You're right, she admitted. I did come here looking for answers. And guess what? I found them. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but Monica held up a hand. I came here dressed as someone you considered beneath you, she said, and you treated me exactly how you would have treated any other person who didn't fit your mold. You humiliated me. You denied me service. You laughed about it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice unwavering. So tell me, Mr. Foster, what exactly did I provoke except the truth? Daniel's face twisted, but he had no comeback. The room was silent again. And then, applause. It started small, a single clap from a young woman at a corner table. Then a few others joined in, murmurs of agreement spreading across the room. The energy shifted as more and more guests began realizing the gravity of what had happened. Some looked away, embarrassed that they had been silent bystanders. Others nodded along, their faces filled with approval. And then, from the back of the restaurant, one final voice. I want to speak. The unlikely voice of change. An older gentleman pushed his chair back and stood up, his face lined with wisdom and experience. His suit was impeccably tailored, his presence commanding. Harrison Blythe, a long-time investor, a man of old money, one of the few whose opinion could actually sway the restaurant scene in this city. Daniel stiffened immediately. Mr. Blythe, Harrison held up a hand, silencing him. You've done enough, he said coldly. Then he turned toward Monica. I've been coming to this restaurant since it first opened, Harrison said. I've watched it grow into one of the finest establishments in the city, but I also know that a business is only as strong as the integrity of the people running it. He glanced toward Daniel. And I see now that this place has lost its way. Monica listened carefully, waiting. I won't pretend I always noticed, Harrison continued. Perhaps I too turned a blind eye. But what I saw tonight, it disgusted me. Daniel paled. Harrison exhaled deeply. I may be an investor, but you, Ms. Sinclair, are the owner. And I believe this place can only be saved under your direct leadership. A murmur ran through the guests. This wasn't just some casual diner offering an opinion. This was a man whose influence carried weight. Daniel looked like he was about to be sick. Monica met Harrison's gaze. I appreciate that, she said evenly, because I will be taking back full control of this restaurant. A stunned silence, and then the final crushing blow. You're fired, Daniel. The final fall. Daniel's face crumbled. Miss Sinclair, get out, Monica said simply, and don't come back. For the first time all night, Daniel had no fight left in him. With a final defeated breath, he turned and walked out the door. Rachel was already gone. Now Monica turned back to the staff, the ones who had stood by and let this happen, and the real work was just beginning. Chapter 4. Rebuilding from the ashes. The weight of Daniel Foster's departure hung in the air like a storm cloud that had finally begun to break apart. His absence left an uneasy silence in the restaurant, a void that neither staff nor patrons knew how to immediately fill. But Monica Sinclair did. She let the tension settle for a moment before she stood from her seat, adjusting the sleeves of her worn-out sweatshirt as if brushing off the last remnants of the disguise that had revealed the ugly truth about her own establishment. Now, she said, her voice carrying across the restaurant with effortless authority, let's get something straight. Every head turned toward her. Servers, cooks, hostesses, guests, all of them watched in rigid anticipation. This restaurant was built on a foundation of excellence, but excellence isn't just about ambiance, fine wine, and Michelin-level dishes. Excellence is about how we treat people. Every person who walks through those doors. Her gaze swept the room, challenging anyone to contradict her. No one did. For too long, some of you have turned this place into an exclusive playground for the elite, treating those who don't look the part as if they don't belong. Rachel and Daniel were gone, but the culture they fostered remained. "I won't allow it." A flicker of uncertainty crossed a few employees' faces, particularly those who had been complicit in enforcing the unspoken rules that led to tonight's humiliation. "I know not all of you were part of this," Monica continued, her voice measured. "Some of you stayed silent because you were afraid. Some of you spoke out and paid the price for it. And some of you," her eyes narrowed, "had no problem enforcing discrimination as if it were just part of the job." The air grew heavier. The guilt was visible now, hanging over the worst offenders like a noose tightening around their necks. Monica clasped her hands together. "So here's how this is going to go." She gestured toward the dining room. "Those of you who believe in what this restaurant was meant to be, those who believe in fairness, dignity, and actual hospitality, will have a chance to prove it." A few shoulders straightened. Hope flickered in their eyes. "But those of you who think like Rachel and Daniel, those of you who have enjoyed looking down on others, humiliating guests and abusing your authority," her smile was ice cold, "your time here is over." The words struck like a hammer against the uneasy silence. A few staff members, clearly shaken, shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a senior waiter named Marcus, who had often stood by Daniel's side, spoke up. "Ms. Sinclair, She cut him off before he could even begin. "If you're about to tell me that things weren't that bad, stop now." Marcus shut his mouth. Monica exhaled. "Anyone who truly wants to be here under new leadership, my leadership, will be re-evaluated. You will be retrained, and you will be expected to treat every guest with the same level of respect, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their bank account." She let the words sink in. "But," she added, "if you don't think you can handle that, you can leave right now." She wasn't asking. She was giving them a choice. And then it happened. The departure of the rotten ones. It started with one. Marcus, one of Daniel's most loyal enforcers, stiffened under Monica's gaze. He had thrived under the toxic environment that Daniel and Rachel had created, and now he knew it was over. Without another word, he removed his name tag, placed it on the nearest table, and walked out. A few others followed, employees who had been part of the problem, the ones who sneered at customers they deemed lesser, who enforced the unspoken rules of exclusivity as if they were written into company policy. One by one, they left. Monica watched them go without an ounce of regret. The doors shut behind the last of them, and for the first time since she stepped into this restaurant that evening, she felt like she could breathe. The ones who remained, however, were different. Lana stood near the bar, her hands still gripping her notepad, her lips pressed together in quiet determination. Jared, the young waiter who had smirked when Rachel was fired, was still there too. And then there were the others, servers, bartenders, cooks, who had never been brave enough to speak up but had never been cruel either. They were still here, and that meant there was hope. A second chance for those who stayed. Monica turned to them. "For those of you who are still here," she said, her voice softer now, "you have my attention." She gestured toward the bar. "Sit." The employees exchanged glances, unsure. Monica gave them a knowing smile. "You've been on your feet all night. Sit down." Slowly, cautiously, they did. Monica took a breath, rolling her shoulders slightly. She wasn't here to rule with an iron fist. She was here to rebuild. "I know some of you were afraid to speak up," she admitted. "I know you had bills to pay. I know standing against someone like Daniel wasn't easy." Lana nodded slowly, and a few others murmured in agreement. "But that fear," Monica continued, "that hesitation." She shook her head. "That ends tonight." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "From now on, this restaurant is going to be what it was always meant to be, a place where everyone is welcome." She met each of their gazes, one by one. "If you're ready for that, you stay. If you want a fresh start, you have one." A quiet beat, and then nods. Not just polite, uncertain nods, but real ones. Jared was the first to speak. "I want to stay," he said, his voice strong. "I want to be proud of working here." Lana smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Me too." And then the others, One by one, they pledged the same. Monica let out a slow breath. This was what she needed. Not blind loyalty, not forced compliance, but people willing to do better. The new era begins. Monica rose from her chair, stretching slightly before flashing them a grin. "All right then," she said, cracking her knuckles. "First things first." She looked toward the kitchen. "I need a damn meal." A few chuckles rippled through the group, tension breaking at last. Marco, the chef, straightened. "I can make something for you, Ms. Sinclair." Monica smirked. "Good, but first tell me this." She crossed her arms. "How much did Daniel cut corners in the kitchen?" A long pause, and then Marco sighed. "More than you'd like to know." Monica let out a dramatic groan, rubbing her temples. "Well," she said, "looks like we're renovating the entire damn menu." Lana laughed. Jared grinned. The others relaxed. And just like that, Le Chateau Noir took its first breath as a new restaurant. Not a playground for the elite, not a symbol of exclusion, but a place of dignity. And Monica Sinclair, she was back where she belonged. Chapter 5. The cleanup begins. The dust had barely settled, but Monica Sinclair wasn't one to bask in moments of triumph for too long. There was work to do. Le Chateau Noir had suffered from the rot of exclusivity, and while the worst offenders had walked out the door, their stain remained. The culture of the restaurant needed more than just a leadership change. It needed a full reset. Monica stood at the center of the dining room, surveying what was left of her staff. Those who remained were watching her, waiting for their next move. "All right," Monica exhaled, rubbing her hands together. "Let's start from the top." She turned to Marco, the chef, who had been silent since their last exchange. "I need to know something." Marco straightened, adjusting his apron. "Yes, ma'am?" Monica folded her arms. "How much of this kitchen, how much of this restaurant, still runs the way I originally built it?" Marco hesitated. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he gestured toward the doors leading to the back. "You should see for yourself." Behind the scenes of a betrayal, the kitchen was not in ruins. It was spotless, pristine, running like a well-oiled machine. But that wasn't the problem. Monica knew what an elite restaurant's kitchen should feel like. This one felt wrong. There was no passion, no sense of pride, just a quiet, mechanical efficiency that had nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with keeping up appearances. She moved slowly, scanning the space, running her fingers along the edge of the marble counters. Then she turned to Marco. "Tell me what I'm not seeing." Marco hesitated. Then finally he told the truth. "The menu's been changed," he admitted. "The portions got smaller, but the prices went up. We started sourcing cheaper ingredients for certain dishes, but the customers were still charged premium prices." Monica's eyes narrowed. "And whose idea was that?" Marco sighed. "Daniel's. Of course." Rachel and Daniel hadn't just been gatekeeping who could enter the restaurant. They had been cutting corners behind the scenes too. "How far did this go?" Monica pressed. Marco shifted uncomfortably. "Some of the seafood wasn't fresh," he admitted. "It was supposed to be delivered daily, but Daniel figured out that we could keep shipments every 3 days instead and just hide the difference with plating tricks." Monica's stomach twisted in disgust. They had cheapened her restaurant. She exhaled sharply. "What else?" Marco hesitated again, and Monica hated that he was afraid to speak. But finally he said it. The waitstaff was instructed to push certain wines even if they didn't pair well with the meal, because Daniel had deals with suppliers. The cocktail menu? The craft spirits were swapped for cheaper alternatives without customers knowing. Some dishes that were advertised as organic, they weren't. Monica clenched her jaw. Daniel had turned her restaurant into a money printing machine at the expense of integrity. She turned to the remaining kitchen staff. "How many of you were forced to go along with this?" Some exchanged nervous glances. A few hesitated, then raised their hands. Marco looked ashamed. "We didn't have a choice." Monica studied them. She had every reason to be furious, but the fact that they were still here meant something. "You have a choice now," she said. "From this moment forward, we do things my way. No more cutting corners, no more lying to customers, no more faking luxury while we serve them garbage." A few of them exhaled, relieved. Others nodded, determination flickering in their eyes. Monica turned back to Marco. "Are you ready to run this kitchen the way it was meant to be run?" Marco straightened his posture. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," Monica said. "Then we start with a full kitchen audit. Everything Daniel changed, we undo it." And just like that, the rebuilding began. Third, the dining room gets a wake-up call. Monica walked back into the dining room where Lana, Jared, and the rest of the waitstaff were still seated, waiting for instructions. "All right," she said, rolling her shoulders. "It's time for some house cleaning." She glanced toward Jared. "Tell me, what were Rachel's rules for seating guests?" Jared winced, looking embarrassed to even repeat it. "She instructed us to seat the best-dressed guests near the windows, where people outside could see them. If someone looked like they didn't belong, we were supposed to stall or pretend their reservation didn't exist." Monica's expression darkened, exactly what she had suspected. "And the VIP treatment?" she asked. Jared grimaced. "We were supposed to treat certain guests, especially important ones, differently. If a well-known investor or socialite came in, we comped extra courses, made sure their drinks were refilled before they even asked, and if they complained about anything, we bent over backward to make them happy." Monica tapped her nails against the table, thinking. "And regular customers?" Jared sighed. "If they weren't considered prestigious, we gave them the bare minimum. Slower service, less attention." Lana chimed in softly. "I always hated that part." Monica gave her a knowing look. "Then you'll love what's coming next." She turned to the entire staff. "Here's the new rule. Every single customer gets the VIP experience. No exceptions." The staff stiffened. "That means no more ranking people based on how much we think they're worth," Monica continued. "No more reserving our best service for people who look the part. From now on, if someone walks into my restaurant, they get treated like royalty, whether they're a billionaire or a college student spending their last $50 to celebrate something special." Jared blinked. "So, you mean we treat everyone equally?" Monica smirked. "Revolutionary, isn't it?" A few of them chuckled, not out of mockery but out of relief. They wanted to be proud of their workplace. And now, they finally could be. Monica's first real test for her staff. Monica clapped her hands together. "All right, let's see if you mean it." The staff perked up. Monica nodded toward the entrance. "I want you to open those doors and seat the next 5 walk-in guests. No judgment, no hesitation. Whoever they are, whatever they look like, they are welcome here." A beat of silence. Then, movement. Jared and Lana stood first. The rest of the staff followed. One by one, they walked toward the entrance, where a group of people had gathered outside. Some were dressed in fine suits, others in casual jeans. A few looked like they had just come from work, exhausted but hopeful. The doors swung open. Lana stepped forward. "Welcome to Le Chateau Noir," she said, her voice genuine. "Right this way." One of the guests, a young black woman who had been shifting nervously on her feet, blinked in surprise. "Wait, really?" Lana smiled. "Yes, really." And just like that, the first real test had been passed. Monica watched from her table, arms crossed, a slow smile spreading across her face. Her restaurant was finally on its way to becoming what it was meant to be. Chapter 6. A reputation on the line. With the first walk-in guests seated and the restaurant's toxic culture beginning to unravel, Monica Sinclair knew this was only the beginning. The changes she had enforced tonight, firing Rachel and Daniel, restoring integrity to the kitchen, eliminating elitism from the dining room, were a statement. But statements meant nothing unless they were upheld. Reputation was everything in the restaurant industry, and Le Chateau Noir's was about to be tested. The watchful eyes of the elite. As Monica observed her staff, she noticed a familiar figure in the far corner of the restaurant. Harrison Blythe. The longtime investor, the man who had publicly denounced Daniel and voiced his support for Monica's return, was still seated at his usual table. He had not left after the night's chaos. Instead, he was watching. He was a businessman to his core. He had stood by Monica in the aftermath of the restaurant's exposure, but it was clear he wanted proof that her leadership was more than just an emotional response to betrayal. Monica didn't mind. She thrived under scrutiny. With a nod, she signaled for Lana. "Get me the finest bottle of wine we have," she said, "and take it to Mr. Blythe on the house." Lana hesitated. "I thought you didn't believe in special treatment." Monica smirked. "I don't, but I do believe in gratitude." Lana nodded and disappeared toward the wine cellar. A few minutes later, Monica stood and made her way to Blythe's table herself. She arrived just as the waiter finished pouring the wine. "Mr. Blythe," she greeted smoothly, taking the seat across from him. "Still here?" Blythe, ever the composed businessman, sipped his wine before responding. "Of course. I wanted to see if the fire in your voice translated into action." Monica tilted her head. "And? What's your verdict?" Blythe considered her for a moment. Then, with the slightest smirk, he gestured toward the dining room. "You've turned your staff upside down," he said. "You've wiped the slate clean and given them a second chance. But do you think that's enough?" Monica leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "No," she admitted. "It's not. Changing policy is easy. Changing mindsets takes time." Blythe swirled his wine. "So, what's your plan?" Monica smiled. "Stay and find out." An unlikely guest arrives. Just as Monica was about to return to her seat, the doors to the restaurant opened once more. And this time, it wasn't just any guest. A tall, polished woman in a white silk blouse and navy trousers stepped inside. She carried herself with the air of someone who wasn't used to being questioned, and when Monica's eyes locked onto her, she nearly laughed, because standing in the doorway, scanning the restaurant as if she were the Queen of England, was Rachel. Rachel, who had been fired just hours ago. Rachel, who had sworn Monica was making a mistake. Rachel, who now, somehow, had the audacity to come back. The entire staff froze. Jared and Lana exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even some of the guests who had witnessed the earlier commotion noticed the shift in energy. Monica stood immediately. She moved toward Rachel with the confidence of a woman who had already won. Rachel, to her credit, didn't flinch. She met Monica's gaze with a polite, too polite smile. "Miss Sinclair," she greeted smoothly, clasping her hands together. "I came to talk." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Talk?" Rachel's expression didn't change. "I believe we may have had a misunderstanding earlier. I'd like to discuss my reinstatement." Jared audibly choked on air. Lana nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. The entire restaurant waited in stunned silence. Monica blinked once, then twice. Then, she threw her head back and laughed. Rachel's final humiliation. "You want your job back?" Monica repeated, wiping the corner of her eye as she caught her breath. "Are you joking, Rachel?" Rachel's smile tightened. "I don't see what's so funny." Monica exhaled, still smirking. "You mean besides the fact that you humiliated a guest in front of an entire restaurant and got fired in disgrace less than 5 hours ago?" Rachel did flinch that time, but she recovered quickly. "I understand that emotions were high," Rachel said, her voice honeyed. "I won't deny that mistakes were made, on both sides." Monica's smirk vanished. "Both sides?" Rachel straightened her posture. "Let's be realistic, Ms. Sinclair. You can't run this restaurant without people who understand its clientele. You need structure. You need experience. And quite frankly," her lips curled slightly, "you need me." That was it. That was the moment Rachel sealed her fate. Monica didn't get angry. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she smiled. A slow, victorious, predatory smile. "Oh, Rachel," she mused. "You still don't get it, do you?" Rachel's confidence faltered. You think this restaurant is successful because of people like you," Monica said smoothly. "But the truth? This restaurant has been surviving in spite of people like you." Rachel's nostrils flared. "You're making a mistake." Monica took a step forward. "No, Rachel," she whispered. "I corrected one." She tilted her head toward the exit. "Get out. And don't embarrass yourself by coming back again." Rachel's hands curled into fists. She opened her mouth, probably to fire one last insult. But before she could, Lana moved first. The young server, the one Rachel had bullied and belittled for months, took a single step forward and held the door open. "Need help finding your way out?" she asked sweetly. Rachel's face burned red. Monica didn't need to say anything else. With one last glare, Rachel stormed out the door. The second she disappeared, a round of applause erupted from the guests. Jared whistled. Lana grinned. And the weight of the last remaining toxic presence in the restaurant vanished. The restaurant's new identity, Monica, turned back to the room. The energy had changed. People were excited. The atmosphere no longer felt suffocating or judgmental. It felt alive. Le Chateau Noir was reborn. She turned to her staff. "This is our fresh start," she told them. "Make it count." Lana smiled. Jared nodded. Marco, standing by the kitchen, gave a firm thumbs up. Monica inhaled deeply. Then, with a satisfied smirk, she returned to her table at the center of the restaurant, where she belonged, where she had always belonged. Chapter 7. The True Test of Leadership. For the first time in years, Le Chateau Noir felt like it belonged to Monica Sinclair again. The toxic roots that had been suffocating her vision, Rachel, Daniel, their elitist policies, their manipulative changes to the restaurant's integrity, were gone. The staff that remained, they were ready to build something better. But Monica knew one thing for certain. Change means nothing unless it lasts. And tonight was just the beginning. The first real dinner service under Monica's rule. As the night progressed, Monica made it clear it was time to work. She wasn't the kind of boss who simply watched from the sidelines. No, she was on the floor, guiding her staff, making sure they saw her leading by example. When Lana hesitated over a wine pairing, Monica stepped in, not to criticize but to teach. "Think about the flavor profile," she said, taking the bottle and pouring a small taste. "Sip it. Now, what dish do you think would bring out the best in it?" Lana did as instructed, tasting carefully before her eyes lit up. "The seared duck," she said. Monica nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Now go tell the guests with confidence." Lana beamed. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Marco was adjusting to new expectations. "This menu was designed to be luxurious," Monica told him as she examined the dishes being prepped. "But luxury isn't just about price, it's about quality." Marco nodded, understanding. "No more shortcuts." "No more shortcuts," Monica repeated. One of the younger sous chefs, clearly eager to prove himself, spoke up. "Ms. Sinclair?" he asked. "Can we bring back the seasonal tasting menu? The one that uses fresh ingredients every week?" Monica paused. That was her original idea. Daniel had cut it because he didn't want to spend extra money on ingredients. But now, a slow smile spread across Monica's face. "Yes," she said. "In fact, that's the first thing we'll reintroduce." The energy in the kitchen shifted immediately. Excitement, not just obligation. They wanted to cook again. They wanted to create. Monica exhaled, knowing she had made the right decision. An unexpected guest changes everything. Just as Monica was settling into the momentum of the night, the doors to the restaurant swung open once more. This time, the guest who stepped inside made everyone pause. He was tall, older, but his presence was unmistakable. His tailored suit was immaculate, and his sharp gaze scanned the restaurant like a predator surveying its next meal. Monica's entire body went rigid, because she knew exactly who he was. Reginald Hawthorne, a ruthless business mogul, a long-time investor, a man who had been friends with Daniel, a man who had influence over whether or not Le Chateau Noir could survive. The restaurant fell into an uncomfortable hush. Whispers spread like wildfire. Jared, standing near Monica, whispered, "Isn't that—" "Yes," Monica muttered. Hawthorne's sharp blue eyes finally landed on her, and a thin, knowing smirk pulled at his lips. Then, without hesitation, he walked straight toward her. A conversation laced with power. Monica didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't show hesitation. If Hawthorne was here to intimidate her, he had picked the wrong woman. He stopped just in front of her, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. "Well, well," Hawthorne mused. "I must say, Monica, you certainly know how to put on a show." Monica smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I don't put on shows, Mr. Hawthorne. I run restaurants. Hawthorne's gaze flickered around the room. That's one way to put it. Another way would be that you've completely unraveled what was once a highly profitable enterprise. There it was. The first punch. Monica didn't blink. Oh? And what exactly do you think I've unraveled? Hawthorne smirked. I heard what happened tonight. The firing of Daniel Foster. The spectacle you made of it. Monica tilted her head. You mean the moment I removed a toxic elitist con man from my restaurant? Hawthorne chuckled under his breath. You always were direct, but let's not pretend this little power move of yours doesn't come at a cost. You do realize that Daniel had connections, don't you? Monica's jaw tightened. Of course she knew. Daniel had spent years building relationships with the wealthiest clientele. If she wiped out everything he had built, she risked losing those high-spending guests. Hawthorne leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. The kind of people who expect a certain exclusivity when they dine, people who won't take kindly to a restaurant that no longer caters to them. Monica exhaled slowly. You mean people who enjoy feeling superior to others? Hawthorne smiled. They're loyal customers. They were, Monica corrected. But if their loyalty was built on snobbery instead of quality, I don't want them. Hawthorne's smirk faltered for the first time. He studied her, as if re-evaluating his approach. You do realize that this little rebellion of yours could cost you more than just a few snobby customers, he said. Investors like me, we don't like uncertainty. Monica's pulse spiked. There it was, the real threat. Hawthorne was here to see if she was weak. If she flinched, he would start pulling strings, encouraging other investors to walk away. It was a test, and Monica Sinclair never failed tests. She took a slow step forward. And what exactly do investors like you want, Mr. Hawthorne? Hawthorne chuckled. That's simple. We want restaurants that make money. Monica arched an eyebrow. Then let me be perfectly clear, she said. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. This place will make money, she told him. More money than ever before, but it will make money the right way. We won't cut corners. We won't discriminate against guests. We won't cheat our customers out of an experience they deserve. Hawthorne's smirk returned, but it was different this time. He was intrigued. And if I decide to take my investments elsewhere? He asked. Monica's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. Then I'll build something even bigger, she said, and I'll do it without you. A beat of silence. Then Hawthorne laughed, a low, knowing, almost amused chuckle. God, I missed this side of you, he muttered, shaking his head. Monica didn't relax. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Hawthorne sighed. Well, Ms. Sinclair, let's see if you can actually pull it off. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away. Monica watched him go, jaw tight. Then, just before he exited the restaurant, Hawthorne paused. Without turning back, he said, If you survive this, I'll double my investment. And then he was gone. The restaurant erupted in murmurs. Jared's eyes were huge. Holy sh! Monica exhaled sharply, forcing her pulse to steady, because she knew what just happened. The restaurant was now under a magnifying glass. Either she proved Le Chateau Noir could thrive without corruption, or she lost everything. She turned back to her staff. You heard the man, she said. Let's prove him wrong. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Le Chateau Noir. For days, Monica Sinclair barely stopped moving. With every shift, every meal served, Le Chateau Noir transformed. The restaurant that once thrived on exclusivity was now a place where excellence wasn't defined by money, but by experience. The staff, once fearful, hesitant, found new purpose. Lana, who had once been dismissed as just another replaceable waitress, was now head server. Jared, eager to prove himself, led training sessions for new hires. Marco, the chef who had once turned a blind eye to corruption, now ran a kitchen worthy of its reputation. And Monica, she was exactly where she was meant to be. But the final test was still ahead, a night that would decide everything. Reginald Hawthorne's warning wasn't just an empty threat. Word had spread. The The high society guests that once flocked to Le Chateau Noir were watching, waiting to see if the restaurant would collapse. Would Monica's bold stance drive the restaurant into obscurity? Or would she prove that true success came from integrity? That night, as the dinner rush peaked, the final test arrived. The restaurant's doors swung open, and the first wave of familiar faces walked in. Wealthy couples, influential critics, high-profile investors, people who once believed this place belonged to them. For a long, tense moment, the staff hesitated. Then Monica's voice rang out, calm and steady. "Welcome to Le Chateau Noir," she said. "Right this way." Lana stepped forward, leading them to their tables. Not to special seats, not with exclusive treatment, but with respect. And then, service began. The food was better than ever. The new menu, crafted from fresh, high-quality ingredients, stunned even the most critical of guests. But more than that, the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just about being seen, it was about being welcomed. And the people who had doubted her, they couldn't deny the truth. The restaurant wasn't dying, it was thriving. The final verdict. As the night drew to a close, Monica stood at the bar, sipping a glass of wine as she observed the room. Harrison Blythe approached, his expression unreadable. "You did it," he finally said. Monica smiled. "Of course I did." Hawthorne's presence loomed in the distance, watching her with his signature smirk. "Looks like you'll be doubling that investment after all," she called over to him. He chuckled, raising his glass in a silent toast before turning away. Monica had won. And she hadn't just saved Le Chateau Noir. She had redefined it. The final lesson. As the last guests departed, Monica turned to her staff. "You proved something tonight," she told them. "Not just to me, not just to the investors, but to yourselves." Jared grinned. "That we can handle anything?" Monica nodded. "And that a restaurant, just like any business, is only as strong as the people who run it." Lana, standing proudly among her team, lifted a glass. "To Le Chateau Noir." The staff echoed the toast. Monica felt something she hadn't in a long time. Pride, not just in the restaurant, but in the people who built it. As she turned out the lights that night, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a legacy. Now, it's your turn. If you made it to the end of this story, you're the kind of person who values resilience, justice, and standing for what's right. And that means your voice matters. So here's what I want you to do. Hit that like button if this story inspired you. Let's show the world that integrity still wins. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're from and what part of the story resonated with you the most. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that doing the right thing always pays off. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. The content is fictitious and does not reflect reality or encourage negative behavior.